Is there anything you want to say, Jeff?
No, I just want to say that 2020 was an amazingly great year for Agile companies. For non-Agile companies, thousands went bankrupt in the United States. I don't know if it was the same way in Australia, but it was devastating to non-Agile companies. But for Agile companies, they took off like a rocket ship because I remember not Biogen, but one of the other huge biotech companies, senior management wrote to me when we went into lockdown. He said, thank God we implemented Scrum last October, because as soon as we went into lockdown, within a week, we were normal operations. Most of our competition is unable to function, and they won't be able to function properly until COVID is over. It's still not over. It's worse now than it was last March. And so their competition is just stuck. So they're grabbing all the market share. And one of the, it's not just companies like Tesla that are skyrocketing, but we work with one of the biggest agricultural companies in the world. Their stock has just gone up almost, not quite as fast as Tesla, but close. So it's been a fantastic year for Agile companies. And with the COVID lockdown, Agile is no longer optional. Survival depends on agility. We just did a go-see to one of the biggest investment firms with hundreds of billions of dollars under management. And we asked them, okay, why do you want to do an Agile transformation? And universally, every manager we talk to, survival. Survival is the number one issue in a $200 billion company. And Agile is dependent on Agile, okay? So for those of you, who are Agile leaders, probably most of you on this call, you used to be nice to have, now you're the people that are going to save these companies, right? So it's really important right now.
Yeah, the more complex the world gets, the more necessary it is to be Agile and be able to react quickly. So we got, as I said, we collected some questions from the participants up front. Probably somebody here in the call has asked this particular question. I'll start off with. And it says, like, if the Agile Manifesto was written today, who would you like to be involved, Jeff?
Well, we had a pretty good group. Certainly the founders of Scrum. Unfortunately, Mike Beadle is no longer with us. And the founders of Extreme Programming, because those were the only widely deployed Agile implementations at the time. And still those guys are probably still the leading thinkers, guys like Kent Beck, Ken Schwaber, Ron Jeffries, Martin Fowler, who is, without Martin Fowler, we probably would not have the Agile Manifesto. The 8 guys in the room when we wrote it, we're like Ron Jeffries, people like that. But certainly Alistair Coburn and several other people were in the room. They were critical. Uncle Bob Martin, who was who convened the meeting and facilitated it, critical. Who would we bring in that would be new? I mean, that's, I think you guys probably have more thoughts about that than I do, but the problem today is actually implementing Agile. So the data shows that over 50% of Scrum teams and over 50% of Agile transformations fail to deliver because they can't be implemented properly. So today I'd really want people who actually know how to implement this, who have a proven track record of really making it work. We'd have to really scour the globe to find out who those people are, because there's just a lot of Agile out there that doesn't work, right?
Yeah. I also remember we were talking, this is quite a few years ago, we were talking about in I think in 2011, you guys, or some of you, or was it most of you, met again? So 10 years
Yeah,
later.
yeah. In 2011 at the Agile 2011, we met. We had an evening session. Had thousands of people in the audience, and towards the end of the session, people asked, "Okay, what would you change in the Agile Manifesto?" And Ron Jeffries said, "The only thing I would change is I would put a note at the bottom which says the number 2 value, delivering at the end of every iteration to the end users. We really mean it." That's the most important thing, right? So, and that's, when you have problems with Agile today, it's because people can't deliver, right? So they're just faking it. So you have to be able to deliver. Today, it's not just at the end of a sprint. Today, it's more often, right? It's every day, every hour. Amazon, they deliver every second. So
I think there was one more thing. It was like you also discussed, like instead of like working software, you discussed like changing that to working product. But somehow, like you also told me that you then agreed on like the Agile Manifesto was a snapshot. It was like that time, that point in time, you decided on this Agile Manifesto, and you're not planning like to change it. If then there would be a new manifesto, but this particular
I
manifesto.
think there's pretty universal agreement that that was a really important point in time, that the Agile Manifesto was a historical document. It would be nice if it said product instead of software because it's more widely used. But it's not going to be done again. A lot of people have tried to do it, but it's just those moments in time where people are ready for a big change. And we'll have to see what the next big change is.
Cool. Thanks, Jeff. I'll move on to the second question here that I have in my list. How has going online changed the way teams use Scrum, such as in product development?
Well, there were 3 surprises to me about Scrum. One of them was that it scales to any size. It scales to thousands of teams. I mean, Amazon has 3,000 or 4,000 teams. SAP has 2,000 or 3,000 teams. I mean, companies have thousands of teams, and it works. Second, it works anywhere. A lot of people are using it with their kids. I mean, people are starting to introduce it in schools. It works everywhere. And third, if you do it properly, it works as well remotely as it does locally. I mean, that's really surprising. When we published a paper in 2007 where we demonstrated that a global distributed set of Scrum teams across Canada, America, and Russia, when we doubled the number of teams, the production more than doubled. And we submitted that to an IEEE conference, and the academic peer reviewers said that had never been done before. You guys can, and on that particular project, every team was on at least 2 continents. There was no local team on that project. So that showed we could do it. And I think it was a big surprise to everybody in the computer industry. And so now that we have COVID, it's really been useful, right? But you have to set it up right. You have to get people connected in a way that can really collaborate.
Yeah, I remember us for many years always been telling people you need to be co-located. It's very suboptimal to be not co-located. I guess there's still some advantage to it, but I agree. It's kind of surprising how well it actually works, even being non-co-located. If the technology is right, and if you're actually allowed to communicate. I'm always surprised how many companies make it really hard for their employees to communicate outside by like locking down Skype, and you can't use that, and you can't use this tool, and that's always surprising to me.
Well, the thing about Scrum is you want to make everything visible so everybody can see what's going on no matter where they are. And all the other methodologies, okay, you have a Gantt chart, but it's not very good at coordinating, people all over the world simultaneously. It just doesn't work. But with the Scrum, and particularly with probably, before it was around 2000, 2007, 8, where we started to get the tooling that would enable this kind of remote work. And today, of course, with Zoom, like we're using here, we have pretty good communication all over the world. I remember in the early days in that Russian project, they had no Zoom. They actually had to do it by conference call, which is a really bad way of doing it, but somehow they managed to overcome that. But today, we have much better communication. It works everywhere. In the early days, when you try to talk to people with India, the communication was so bad, it was even a conference call was difficult. But now the tooling and the communication channels, and they're just going to get better. When we get to con and computer, we'll be like in the same room. It won't matter anymore. We'll have real telepresence. It'll be instantaneous.
Yeah, in our company, we've started using a virtual office solution where like you check in the morning and then you have your own like virtual office where you sit and people can see it, and you can see like, Klaus is talking to Mirko right now. I'll better go into that room now and start communicating with them because I have a question to both of them. That actually works really well. It actually makes some things even more transparent than in the so-called real world.
Yeah.
It's a good,
the real eye-opener to me was a gaming company that started up, and this was maybe 7 years ago, online poker gaming company, Scrumming. And the founder said to me, the next guy we're going to hire is in Japan because we never work in the same room. If we're in the same room, we actually disrupt one another. We're online 100% of the time. They were using Skype at the time. The window is always open, so we can always talk to each other. And we find if we actually get co-located, we kind of disrupt one another. We're not as effective. But as long as we can talk to each other constantly, it's good. So, hey, the next guy is going to be in Japan because it doesn't matter where they are. So this is a younger group of people. They're used to the electronic way of working. Okay, so that opened my eyes that the younger people are going to have a different take on this.
Yeah, the only challenge we have left is the time zones. You need to fix those somehow.
Yeah,
because this is not a long-term solution. Getting up at 1 o'clock at night. Cool. Thanks, Jeff. I'll go on to number 3 in my list here. Is there a recommended path to becoming a Scrum Master?
Well, one of the things we're pretty good at Scrum Inc. is training Scrum Masters. And what we do is we often bring in fairly junior people and we put them on a team with senior people, and then the team trains them. That works pretty well. But right now we're in a mode where everything's remote. We think we need actually more senior Scrum Masters. We have no managers, so the Scrum Masters need to really deal with all the issues. And we're going to raise the bar. But in brand new Scrum Masters, first of all, they need to know what it is. and our training changed dramatically around 2016. When we were approached by one of the largest companies in Japan, who was partially owned by Toyota. And they told us the Scrum training was going on was inadequate. And we said, well, why is that? They said, because the Scrum Masters are not trained in Lean, so they don't know the basics they don't know what Takeuchi and Tanaka were talking about when they wrote the original paper that created the word Scrum Project Management. And if they don't know that, then he said, we're going to be the traders for Toyota. If you can't show that you're better lean than Toyota using proper Scrum, it's a non-starter. So we learned that we have to teach the basic tooling in lean for removing waste. Okay, they have 50 years of figuring out how to remove waste. So you need to be able to do value stream mapping. You need to be able to calculate process efficiency. You need to be able to do root cause analysis. You need to be just like every single person in Toyota is trained in the A3. You need to have that basic toolkit. And second, after working with Venture Capital Group now since 2006, 15 years, what we learned is that when people are, when our venture companies, we want them all doing Scrum, and we train them and boot them up. The teams don't know how to work together. They know what Scrum is, but they don't know how to work together. So we've had to spend 10 years figuring out, okay, what do we tell these teams? And now we've got it all written up in the patterns book that we published last October. And in that book, there are a set of 8 to 10 patterns that are absolutely critical to get high performing teams. So a Scrum Master has to have those patterns in the back pocket. And the third thing today is almost nobody works on one Scrum team anymore. Everybody's in an environment where there's more than one Scrum team. And that means that teams need to know how to work together, just like developers learn how to pair program. Teams need to learn how to pair deliver, right? And so Scrum Masters need to know how to facilitate that. So the first step is to get the right knowledge in those 4 areas, and then immediately try to get actual experience and actually doing it. Okay. So, I tell people, get the knowledge and then do it. Even if you have to volunteer to do it for nothing, get out there, get some experience, because knowledge is not enough. You need to actually have experience working with teams. And once you can show that you're good at getting teams working, then getting a Scrum Master job anywhere is easy.
So there's a lot more to it than just going into a 2-day Scrum Master course, obviously.
Yeah.
And I remember you once said during a course, like a face-to-face physical course that we had in Zurich, here in Switzerland, somebody asked a similar question, and you compared it to having a driving license, like taking the courses, like
right.
having the driving license, like just coming out of driving school and getting the license doesn't mean you're a great driver. Actually, might be a great health risk to be on the street when you enter the street with your new driving license. And it's similar to a Scrum Master. You always said like you have a license to cause a lot of damage. I remember you saying.
Yeah.
Yes. Cool. We'll take definitely one more question. So it says the question all executives want to know is, how much is it going to cost me? How does Scrum Scale consider project budgets? What are your thoughts?
Well, often to get funded, you need to know what the budget is, right? That's what this question is. And we've come up with several ways to do that. I mean, some of the leading consulting companies in the world do fixed price projects all the time with Scrum. So they have to estimate everything up front. So it helps to have historical data. But even if you don't, what we're teaching now in the training is large scale estimation. It's really easy. Within a couple of hours, you can estimate a really big project and get as good an estimate as you would get spending a week in a waterfall team trying to figure it out. In fact, in
I'd
one
say
company, one telecom company, they did in 10 minutes what took more than 8 hours. So it's it's over 50 times faster to get that number using agile estimation techniques.
isn't part of that equation not only historical data, but also stable teams?
Stable teams, yeah. If you don't have stable teams, you have no idea when it's going to be done.
Yeah, because it's not just a question of like estimating how much work it is, it's also like what's the velocity, like how fast can this team actually deliver something. Yeah. Yeah, so I think we're going to take one more, and then we're going to move into the we call it live questions. So I'll give the word to Marcus. Have you seen an increase in Scrum adoption for non-software delivery?
Well, when I founded Scrum Inc. in 2006, one of the major objectives was to move Scrum outside of software. And so our business, I mean, we've always had some software business, but our business is predominantly non-software. We work with oil companies. We work with a lot of hardware companies, automobile manufacturers, rocket companies. And also we have special programs for Scrum and HR. We have, with Scrum Scale, it's an organizational framework. So our goal has been, and this has been driven largely by the venture capital group in 2006. When they adopted Scrum, they said the whole company needs to do it. It's not just the software guys are easy. we can triple their velocity in a couple of sprints. It's the rest of the company that we need to Scrum. So we've been working on Scrum and the rest of the company since 2006. And so it was interesting, in this last update to the Scrum Guide, it took about 1.5 years to go through multiple cycles. Ken came to me, he said, "Hey, Jeff, remember 10 years ago, you said we needed to update it so it'd be good for all kinds of Scrum teams?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm ready to do it now." So we took everything about software out of the Scrum Guide. And in the process, I asked the leadership of scrum.org, I said, "Is most of your business still in software?" And they said, "No, most of our business is outside of software." Most of Scrum Inc.'s business is outside of software. That tells me that most of the Scrum business is not software anymore.
Yeah. I think I remember you telling me, Arlene, your wife has been using Scrum in church as well.
Yeah, she wrote a classic paper, I think back in 2008 or 9. It's in the IEEE Digital Library on Scrum in church. And she had spent 20 years as a Unitarian Universalist minister, a pastor in churches. And she had all kinds of problems with the church. And every time she had a problem, I said, "Well, here's how Scrum would fix that." Finally, she started doing Scrum in churches. And Ken and I were watching that and said, "Boy, that's really interesting what she's doing," because it was an agile transformation of an organization, which is what we're doing now. And so Ken and I learned from that on how to do Scrum broadly in an organization. And actually, wasn't maybe 2 or 3 years after she published her paper, I was in Amsterdam meeting with the largest bank in Amsterdam. They had a division that was using Scrum everywhere for training, for sales, for marketing, they were doing a lot. They had a lot of Scrum software teams as well, but they were doing it everywhere. And I said, "Where did you get this idea?" They said, "We read the paper, Scrum in church." We said, "If you could do it in church, you can do it everywhere." So this bank is running Scrum everywhere, right? So this is back probably 2009. So yeah, she was the first one to do Scrum everywhere.
Pretty cool. I'm using parts of Scrum. I shouldn't say a full Scrum at home to run the family, if I may say so, call it that. We do retrospectives every week. And yeah, I even have a conference talk on that. If you ever want me to tell that, it will at Agile Perth. Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Marcus, are you ready with a few questions from the audience?
Sure am. I've got to say, we have been inundated with questions here whilst you've been talking, Jeff, on the chat, but also direct messages. So I've had to do a bit of quick prioritization in the background. One common one that seems to have come up has been, could you tell us a little bit more about funding approaches for agile delivery that have worked or not worked so well in the past?
Well, one of the big competitive advantages, and we got a lot of that started, particularly in Denmark, where Klaus originally comes from, is you come in with a bid, you say, I remember Jurgen, who's the CEO of Trifork, he found out there was a big project funded by the government, and he found out what all the waterfall bids were. And he came in at the lowest waterfall bid. He said, we'll do it for the lowest waterfall bid, but the difference is we're going to give you all the changes for free. And he grabbed the contract away from the waterfall vendors. And he said to me, I know I can deliver that contract. It was a 4 million euro contract. He said, I know at Scrum, I can deliver at half the price. So I'm going to deliver that at 2 million euro. And I'm going to pick up 4 million. And by giving them all the changes for free, we just took it off the table for the waterfall vendors. So that was a core strategy for many agile consulting companies, particularly in Scandinavia. And the way you do it, of course, is you say, okay, we're going to do the highest priority things first, highest business value first. And we know that 65% of the stuff in the backlog is never or rarely going to be used by customers anyway. So at any sprint boundary, we're going to let the customer change the backlog and add things in, as long as they throw away some of those junk stories. That stuff that we never should do anyway. It's way at the bottom of the list. And change for free. And some companies who are, you have to be able to know what your velocity of delivery would be. But companies that know how they can deliver can also do money for nothing. Okay, and the way you set that one up is you say, we're going to not only give you change for free, but we're going to allow you to terminate the contract at any time. And we think it should be terminated early because, remember, 65% of the stuff will never be used by your customer anyway. So when you see the return on investment getting low on stories, you stop the project. And you save all this money in your original budget, and in return, you give us maybe a third of the remaining budget. And companies that have been doing that can drive their margins really high. A typical consultancy margin is 15, 20%. You could double that in change for free projects. And so it's a retirement early strategy. So for agile companies that are really good at this, I remember one company in Florida, they did preloaded Visa and MasterCard. And they had a Six Sigma team. They were a lean company. A Six Sigma team decided they needed to go to Scrum. And within 6 months, they took 100% of the contracts for preloaded Visa and MasterCard. No other vendor could even get any business. And within a year, they were bought by one of the big brokerage firms for, hundreds of millions of dollars. And they all the leadership retired. But people who can do this well can make a ton of money in fixed price contracts. And particularly now in the COVID world where everybody's distributed, the average consultancy doing waterfall projects, what's going to happen to them with COVID? They were already late. They're going to be even later. They always delivered stuff the customer didn't want. It's going to be even worse. I mean, a good Agile consultancy should be able to crush all waterfall competition in COVID environment.
Really signals the need for change, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Now we've got a really good one here from Richa, who asked, when it comes to scaling Scrum, would you be able to share some of the risks that we need to be mindful of?
Okay, the risks are, we know that the recent surveys show that 50% of Agile transformations fail. 53%, and the MIT Sloan Business School did a research on the failures, and they found that 67% of them went out of business. So that tells you Agile transformations are very high risk. Of course, not doing an Agile transformation is maybe even higher risk. So even though it's risky, people are doing it. And what we see, the biggest risk is not getting rid of the things that slow you down. And I have a good presentation on this. It goes through the biggest challenge in running larger projects is Brooks' Law. Okay, Brooks' Law was defined by Fred Brooks in the Mythical Man Month, a classic textbook describing how he ran the IBM 360 operating system project, which put IBM on the map as a mainframe company. And in there, he says, if a project is late and you add more people, it gets even later. And here's the reason why. As you get more people, the communication channels explode, okay? The number of people goes up linearly, but the number of communication channels goes up almost exponentially. And that makes the productivity per person go down. So we get situations like we have a published case study from Schlumberger, big oil company. They had spent $1 billion on a global SAP rollout, 10 years. During the last couple of years before they called us in, they'd spent $150 million with IBM and Accenture trying to get them agile. And their solution was they had 600 people. And by the time IBM and Accenture got through, they had 1,200 people. And what the numbers showed was that the 600 people were doing as many SAP function points per month as the 1,200 people. So they got no increase in productivity by doubling the workforce. So we came in and the CIO had read our book, Twice the Work in Half the Time. So he said, you need to come in and fix this because it's going to be another 10 years and another $1 billion minimum to get this thing done. And we need something that's faster than that. So we came in and we got them up in 8 months. So we cut the $1 billion and the next $1 billion and the next 10 years were cut to 8 months. And by implementing Scrum, as is in the book, the red book, Scrum, the Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. And he said, well, we added all these people. Let's start by cutting most of these people are contractors anyway. Let's start by terminating contracts and get the staff back down to around 600. We're not going to lose any productivity. We know that. So we're halfway there and doubling the productivity with half the workforce, right? And then all we need to do is double the productivity of the 600. You actually cut it to 700. And we were able to do that. By 8 months later, when they were measured, they actually were measuring SAP function points. So it was completely independent of Scrum. It was an SAP metric. And they were delivering 11 times as many per month with Scrum as they were previously. So we have if you read the red book, you'll see in the first chapter is all about the FBI. The FBI was mandated by Congress to produce a system that would track terrorists after 9/11. 10 years later, They did one project with 170 million, that failed. A second project was commissioned for 450 million. By the time they spent 400 million, it was shut down as a failure. So now they had wasted $570 million and had nothing. They hired a Agile CIO and an Agile CTO, and they put 30 people in the basement of the FBI building doing Scrum. And for less than $50 million, they delivered the system that runs the FBI today. So 30 people, 50 million in about a year, compared to over 300 million people just in one project. So it's probably 500 people, over 10 years, wasting $570 million, delivering nothing compared to 30 scrummers in the basement delivering for 50 million in about a year. What's the difference in velocity?
So I think the message we're getting is the risk of scaling is scaling, and where we can, don't scale.
Yeah, the first thing you do in scaling is to descale, right? We did that at Toyota. We went into Toyota. They had a project. They had 200 people on it. They've been running it for 5 years. It was going to go into every Toyota dealer in the United States and pay commissions on cars they sold. So it was a really important project. We cut the 200 to 20, and in 6 months we delivered it. So 200, 5 years, nothing. 20 people, 6 months, everything. What's the difference in production? I mean, it's astronomical. I mean, and this is why thousands of non-Agile companies are forced into bankruptcy in COVID. COVID is worse today than it was last March in the United States. So thousands more are going to bankruptcy. And the Agile companies are scooping up all the market share from all these companies that go out of business. The Agile companies are grabbing all that business. And if they're publicly traded, their stock price is going to the moon. Last year was the best year in the history of business in the United States for Agile companies. It's unbelievable. I had to start my own investment companies. I just had a portfolio of a few Agile companies and it exploded. I had to start a separate company to manage the investments. And one of our Scrum Scale trainers told me in a recent, we had a little meetup like this. He said, Jeff, a couple of years ago, you reminded me that I should put my money where my mouth is. He said, I am now financially independent. I don't have to work anymore. I just do Scrum Scale for fun.
Fantastic. Thank you. Now, look, we've had a lot of questions about this one. I don't know whether we're going to be able to keep the lid on it for much longer, but a lot of people interested in your views around some of the other frameworks out there when it comes to SAFe and LESS and how Scrum works with those.
Well, SAFe is totally dominant in the market space right now, and they've been very useful for getting people started with Scrum. And the reason they've been so successful is it's safe because it gives every manager a job, right? So managers who know nothing about Agile, they like SAFe. The problem is, and many of the companies I work with are SAFe implementations, is that it doesn't make you go much faster. A typical SAFe implementation gives you maybe 10 or 20% improvement. We published a paper last year at Agile 2020, which unfortunately Agile 2020 was canceled, but all the papers are on the submission site that were accepted. And one of them was from Cricket Loans, which just went public a few months ago. They had 17,000 people. They implemented 26 release trains, SAFe release trains. And they got the biggest increase in productivity with SAFe that I've ever seen in any companies. And they actually cut their cycle time in half. They were delivering everything twice as fast. So they effectively doubled their velocity with SAFe, okay? So this is probably the best SAFe implementation on the planet. Now, the release train manager, he wanted to become a Scrum at Scale trainer. He felt he could improve the implementation. So he came through the program, became a Scrum at Scale trainer, and went back. And in the paper, we published exactly what he did step by step. And in less than 6 months, his release train was going 3.6 times faster than any other release train in the company. So what it shows you is that Scrum at Scale can take the fastest SAFe implementation in the world and make it do twice the work in half the time, almost. Not quite, only 3.6 instead of 4.0. But so and the reason is Scrum at Scale is an organizational operating system. It's not an IT framework. All these frameworks you mentioned, they're for IT. But to get a business really agile, you need to get the executives doing Scrum. You need every department doing Scrum. And to do that, you need Scrum at Scale. So we work with the biggest Scrum at Scale operation in Europe, Ivar Jacobs's company out of London. And they have multiple Scrum at Scale trainers because Ivar came to me years ago and said, we want to do Scrum right for our SAFe implementations, and we need more than SAFe. We need to be able to train the management Scrum. We need to be able to train sales team, marketing teams, all kinds of teams in Scrum, and Scrum at Scale is a way to do that. So they have multiple Scrum at Scale trainers. One of them is Ian Spence. He's a SAFe fellow. So he's one of the most knowledgeable people in the world in SAFe. And he and I co-train together fairly regularly. And his view is that every one of these IT frameworks is actually an implementation of Scrum at Scale. And so he goes into big companies and he runs the company like the government of Gibraltar. He runs the government of Gibraltar with Scrum at Scale. They have Saxo Bank in Denmark is another one where they do this. And they have big IT implementations of SAFe, and also another IT group may be doing less, and another might be doing excess. They don't care, but to get the management and the organization agile, they need Scrum at Scale. Mm. So his point of view, he's really framework agnostic. If you like SAFe and IT, fine. It's not going to get you super performance, but maybe that's what you can get. Less is more. Less follows the Scrum guide exactly, so it's should give you better performance than SAFe. So if you're an IT group that wants to do less, great. But at the organizational level, we're going to run Scrum at Scale because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how good the IT group is. What it matters is how agile the business is. And that requires Scrum at Scale.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jeff. I'm mindful of our time here, but one that keeps coming up a lot. Got a lot of excited people here as you're talking about Scrum in different business areas outside of IT. And people are asking, what's your advice for talking to HR teams or finance teams or mining teams explaining Scrum outside of software delivery?
We have a course now that we do for Scrum and HR, for Scrum and construction. I mean, it's fascinating what can go on. We thought, and I experienced this in the early days of Scrum, we go to the HR group and we say, okay, here's where we're Scrumming and here's what it looks like. And you need to change your HR policies to hire agile people, right? And they would say, oh, wow, that's really cool. That's totally different than what we're doing. And they would change their behavior. So particularly in large companies, really some of the first people you want to train are the HR people, right? Because they're the ones, to get Scrum working well, you need to hire people that can work well on teams. And I remember one of the first Scrum companies, the HR people said, oh, we thought you wanted to just hire really smart developers and then, you slid food under their door and nobody ever talked to them. And we said, no, we need to hire people that can work on a team. And they said, well, it's really hard to hire good developers, but it's just as easy to hire someone that can work on the team as hire someone that can only take food under the door. So they completely changed their policy. It wasn't any more work for them, but it created a huge increase in productivity for the company. The other thing is, performance evaluations. They have to totally change to work well in an agile environment. Timesheets, they have to go. All these things. Space has to be different. Job descriptions have to change. Everything HR does has to change to provide a good agile environment. So, you could argue those are the first people we should change. And so we have a special program for that. Another amazing thing to me was in construction. I was talking to the CEO of a construction company, one of the first ones we started really working closely with. And we showed him that, the Scrum guide says you have to have less than 10 people, but actually, if you look at the pattern on teams breaking up or splitting in the patterns book, it says when you get to 7, there's going to be noticeable slowdown. You need to split by 7. And the CEO of this big construction company said, what that tells me is that I can get the same productivity with 7 as with 10. All my teams today are 10. I can cut them all to 7. And my margins today of 5%, I can increase them to 30%. I can become the most profitable construction company in the business simply by using, the simple principles upon which Scrum is based. So now we're really building out at construction. It's amazing, just these simple things have such a huge impact on companies. We had already figured that out in the oil business. That the oil business, we've had in some ways better success in the oil business than in the software business, because once they figure out that this really works, they got better leadership and they get the whole organization running that way. But I think in construction, it's going to be the same way. Once they figure this out, it's going to be so much more profitable. Okay, so what was the question in the beginning? Because I went around the block a little bit here.
No, that was very good. It was how you might explain Scrum to non-software teams.
Yeah, it's all about, first of all, the non-software teams do not want to hear any software stuff, right? They'll say, we're not a development team, and we don't want to hear any metrics about software. We're not building software systems. Forget about integration and all these build systems, DevOps. That's crap. We're building a bridge, or we're building at Shell. They're building refineries. You got to tell us how to build a $2 billion refinery for $1 billion. Explain that. So that's a different conversation. It's still the same conversation, but it's all about how to build components of a refinery, right? Or if it's a hardware is the first area where we started doing a lot of this. The hardware systems tend to be built like monolithic systems, just like we used to build these spaghettified software systems that everything is dependent on everything else. Anybody have any of those? I think there are a lot of them in Australia. We've worked with the banks particularly, right? So in hardware, they do that all the time. And so like you go in, and I remember years ago, the BMW leadership met with me and said, how fast can we get agile? I said, well, you've got many thousands of people like Microsoft. It took them about 7 years. They said, if we're not agile in 3 years, we're in deep trouble. And sure enough, 3 years later, the CEO got fired because of Tesla. And I asked them, if I buy a BMW, when do I get an upgrade to my car? They said, never. I said, my Tesla gets an upgrade twice a month. And if I buy a new Tesla every quarter, there are 13 hardware upgrades per quarter on the assembly line, which is 52 times as fast as Ford. How many upgrades on the assembly line do you do every year? Well, we're about the same as Ford. Well, I'm getting an upgrade every 2 weeks to my current car. And if I buy a new one every year, I get 52 new hardware improvements in that car upgrade. And if you can't do that, you're going to have big problems. And they are having big problems. Look at the market capitalization of Tesla compared to Toyota, right? How big is Tesla compared to Toyota? Anybody know?
Well, I heard recently Tesla are now one of the biggest or richest companies in the world. They've overtaken Apple recently.
Absolutely. They're richer than Facebook. People are complaining on the investment group today.
Yeah.
How can it be that Tesla's worth more than Facebook?
It's been amazing.
Facebook adds no real value.
Yeah.
Tesla is going to crush Facebook in terms of valuation.
Yeah,
They're going to be bigger than Apple.
Yeah, aren't they valued bigger than the other top 5 car manufacturers combined?
They're almost 4 times as big as Toyota, which used to be number 1. And I've worked with Toyota as well. I said, Toyota, you have to innovate faster.
Yeah.
You can't rest on your laurels. It's not going to work. So
definitely. So Jeff, thank you so much. This has been amazing. And this has been a new record for Agile Perth. I think we got very close to the 100 attendees. I'm glad it didn't max out and we didn't, no one missed out. Everyone got in, but it's been really insightful, really great way to start the day. I've had my yogurt, I've had a swim in the ocean, and I've heard from Jeff Sutherland. So I'm winning this morning. Yeah, thank you very much, Klaus and Marcus, for helping organize this. And I've put a link up here because